Hare Krishna, everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of the Hare Krishna Project. And this is a very special episode 100. Yay!
Woo! 100. What a number.
Yes, yes. And today we have a very, very special guest. Don't worry if you just tuned in. This isn't a Vaishnava episode of the Freaky Friday where we do a body swap. This is actually our special guest, Narada Das today. He's going to be our special guest, and I will be your host, or try to. And thank you, Narada, for inviting me to be the guest host for today. It's an honor to me also. But before we move on with the interview, I would just like to remind everyone. Oh, sorry. This is my mistake. I forgot. You see what happens when you call a so-called professional to be your guest host. Your interview gets interrupted by the sound of the cell phone. So my apologies for that. Anyway, I just would like to ask everyone kindly, before we proceed with the interview, if you are following these interviews of the Hare Krishna Project podcast, to hit the subscribe button. If you are watching the interviews on the YouTube, you know where the little bell icon is. Or if you are watching it on the Facebook page of the Hare Krishna Project page, then please like and follow. So that's very nice to be reminded of that. So let's proceed. Okay, Narada, please, we will start with the basic questions. Tell us about yourself and your background. We all know your spiritual name, but you can also give us your mundane name and just tell us about your family and how you came to Krishna consciousness and things like that.
Just to say, whenever I bump into somebody like a friend from school after 20 years, and they say, "Oh, how are you doing?" or "What are you up to these days?" That's like one of the worst questions. Like, "Oh, well, what do you mean? Where do you want me to start?" But my background is I'm from a beautiful part of England called Somerset. So Somerset is a very historical county, and so Glastonbury, the famous Glastonbury festival, is in Somerset, and I live just south of Bath. So Bath is a very old historical city. I think the first king of all England was crowned in Bath in 964. So there's a lot of history. And I would probably typically say I'm from a working class background, raised by my mother until I was 12, 13 years old. My parents were very young when I was born. They were in their late teens, and they were not married. And myself and my brother came along in the 1980s. My father left when I was 4, which, if I'm honest, probably now kind of indirectly or subconsciously has caused me to have a lot of the beliefs that I have today and the opinions that I have on things today. I was pretty much raised by my mother and my grandmother. My grandfather was also around, and he was a wonderful guy, but particularly my mother and my grandmother, and I was very close to them. And I would say we were nominally Christian. So, as most people in Western countries are, certainly in Britain, I was christened as a baby for good luck. It's kind of a thing that you do. And my background is in the Methodist Church. So Methodists are kind of non-conformist Anglican. So I would say they're quite liberal theologically. Methodist Church is very focused on how can we share the love of God with others? How can we show people that God loves them? It's kind of like the Salvation Army, but a bit different. So I wasn't raised going to church, in that sense. And it wasn't until I was 15 when my grandmother died. So I was really close to my grandmother, and it wasn't until I was 15 that I started to question these things about God and heaven and hell. And I remember my grandmother passing away, and we went to the chapel of rest to see her body. I'd never seen a dead body before. I think she's the only dead body I've ever seen. I never saw my grandfather. And I remember going in, I was just freaked out by the whole experience, because she was lying on a bed, and I just kept thinking, she's going to move. you know, I can see her breathing, you know, it's kind of like, it was very weird. And my mum, my brothers were there, my grandfather was there. And I remember that moment like it was yesterday. My grandfather burst into tears and I was kind of trying to console him. And then I started to really think about that. I could see it was her body, and she, you know, she'd been embalmed, which means that, you know, she still looked fresh, but something was different. Something was missing. Something had gone. And that really set me on a journey for trying to discover what that thing was, what had disappeared, what has gone. And I guess to cut a long story short, I became interested in the study of religion and religions. I wanted answers. So I did an A-level in religious studies at school. And I started going to the Methodist Church in my village. So the village I'm from is a very kind of white working class village. And I had a fantastic time at the Methodist Church. I went there for a number of years. They were really, really nice people. And I would say my spiritual birth was in the Methodist Church, which I would say now, if I look back, has shaped my approach to Krishna consciousness. The Methodists are very much into, we're all equal, God loves everyone the same, you know, and we should try and act in a way that's fair and just. I then went to university to do a degree in comparative religion. And it was wonderful, you know, learning about all these religions, you know. And it wasn't a lot of universities in the West will do like Christian theology. If you do a degree in theology, it's the study of God or the study of the Christian idea of God. But this wasn't theology, this was comparative religion. And, you know, we learned about Christianity and Hinduism and Sikhism, but we also learned about the Church of Scientology. We also learned about the Brahma Kumaris. We also learnt about Jonestown, which was a suicide cult in the 1970s. And we also learnt about ISKCON.
Wow.
So I discovered, academically, I discovered ISKCON during the same week I discovered the Church of Scientology and L. Ron Hubbard. And it was just like, it was really
I don't know if
comical.
that's really good, but you know, what's happened has happened.
Yeah. So, but what was interesting in my life is that was the first I'd heard about ISKCON as an institution, and that was probably 2002, 2003. I'm going to show you a book in a minute, which I've got out to show you. But just before that, my stepfather's been in my life for 25 years. He's a great guy. He's very good for my mum. He's a very nice person. But he's also a devout atheist.
Oh.
He doesn't do God. He believes that religion has a role in society, but he doesn't want anything to do with it. But he's a massive fan of the Beatles, and he loves the Beatles. So when George Harrison passed away in 2001, in the UK, they re-released his song, My Sweet Lord, back into the charts. So this was a year before I went to university, and my stepdad brought the CD, back in the days of CDs, and he kept playing it over and over again. Hare Krishna, my sweet Lord. And I was like, oh, this is interesting. George Harrison must have been a Hindu or something to do with the Hindus. You know, I didn't know. I thought the Hare Krishnas were some kind of Hindu sect or something, which some people say that they are. So what happened in within 12 to 18 months of an overlap was I'd heard Hare Krishna for the first time that I can remember, and I'd learned about ISKCON. I want to show you this book because this was my Bible at university. This is The New Believers, written by David Barrett, and sects, cults, and alternative religions. And there's a bookmark in it because I'm rereading it now after 20 years. I've decided to kind of go back to university and do some reading. And this tastes like a treasure chest of up until it was published in 2001, multiple sects and alternative religions. And so my first encounter with ISKCON was through this book. So that's kind of my background, and then in terms of, before we get onto the Hare Krishna stuff, I guess in more detail, after I left university, I then got involved. I then got involved with local government, and I worked. I don't often talk about this in Hare Krishna circles, but I kind of worked in political circles for about 10 years. Um,
I know. I have it in my notes.
you have it in your notes. So I worked in political circles for a number of years and in my 20s, before I gave all that up about 10 years ago, to metaphorically jump in the back of the Hare Krishna van and go for a long drive. And I never went back to politics, but it certainly helped shape me and my views on things today. Yeah.
Great, great. Well, it's a great thing that you just mentioned that, because I have here in my notes that you were the original creator of the Party in the Park festival, and then that you were local councillor for Peace down on Bath and Northeast Somerset. And that is actually that was your role, or your roles from your time as a civil servant that you just mentioned. So I was particularly interested in asking you, what made you change your focus from that mundane service to spiritual service? Because I see the common thread, the common motive in all that you do, although I do not know you well. But as I was preparing myself for this interview, I saw that you were again serving the citizens of Bath and Northeast Somerset with this festival, and then as a councillor, and you are also the director of the Baines Faith Foundation. So you continue to serve now, still the citizens, but I would say more of a focus on spiritual seekers. So you love to serve, but what made you change that focus? What shifted your focus from, let's say, civil service to spiritual service?
That's a great question. I'm impressed that you've done your research.
What do you mean? I'm a journalist, although I have my cell phone ringing at the beginning of the interview.
My 20s were very eventful in a lot of ways. And they often say the 20s is the decade when you make mistakes, or by the time you get to your 30s, you start to calm down a bit. I don't know what 40s means. I'm entering my 40s next year, but I don't know what that means. But I always wanted to make a difference. I always wanted to help people. And that was instilled in me, I think, by the Methodist Church when I was 16. How are you going to make a difference? How are you going to show people that God loves them? And so I started to get involved in the community. I stood for the council and I won. I served 8 years on the council. I started to do stuff in the community. I created a festival, which still runs today with 3,000 people. I set up a charity. I set up a faith foundation. And I did all of those things, not because I wanted to add more stuff to my CV, but because there were things that needed to be done. There were gaps that needed to happen. So one of those things, the Faith Foundation that I set up with some colleagues, we wanted to set up an organization that promoted interfaith dialogue and promoted certain issues amongst the wider public. So one example is Holocaust Memorial Day, which is every January. So I organized that in my city. And there are other organizers too, not just me. And even though that is pretty much almost nothing to do with Krishna consciousness, for me, I'm really passionate about doing it, because I know this is a bit topical again now because what's happening in the Middle East, but the Holocaust was one of the worst events in human history.
Yes.
And we have to learn from that in terms of recognizing that hatred and all of that happened in Nazi Germany was based on identifying with the body. These are Jewish people, these are gay people, these are black people, these are disabled people. Therefore, we hate them. We don't like them. We're going to kill them. And I often think about, I wouldn't say it's a hatred, it's my distaste for the far right that encourages me in my Krishna consciousness. In the sense that, identifying with the body has caused so much pain and upset, on a mass scale like the Holocaust. So that's why I'm passionate about raising awareness of that. But when I got to the age of 30, after 10 years of doing it, I wouldn't say I got bored of all those things, but I was looking for something much deeper. I wanted to be fulfilled. These things were good, but I wanted to be happy forever, or I wanted to always feel happy. And probably when I was close to 30, I don't think I had a breakdown, but I was close to it. I was exhausted. I got up every day from 5 in the morning to 11 at night. I was always serving others, trying to help people all the time. And also I just saw so many things as mundane. I remember, not sure whether to mention this or not, I was dating a woman at the time, and she was very beautiful and very blonde. And I remember thinking and feeling, after another broken relationship, well, what's the answer? Am I going to get a new girlfriend? Where I'm looking for fulfillment in the wrong areas, in the wrong ways. I want to feel joy. It's a Christian term. I want to feel joy and happiness forever, not just through these temporary things. And then at the age of 30, I decided, right, I need to not give it all up, but I need to calm down, and I want to go in search of something much more deeper, much more spiritual.
Yes, we would say bliss, as you said, joy is a Christian term. We would say we want to fill with bliss. Absolutely. Okay, so what happened then? What was your next step? Or because we say God moves in mysterious ways, as he did with the George Harrison song and your stepfather. What happened? Because I know that as soon as a sincere soul asks this, sincerely and strongly, that God, Krishna, however you call him, reciprocates. So what happened, if I may ask?
Well, I'd actually met the devotees 10 years before. So I didn't then just discover Krishna consciousness. I'd met the devotees 10 years before. I went to Bhaktivedanta Manor 10 years before that. So I had some connections with the movement. I had done some reading, I'd done some chanting, and I liked being associated with the movement, even though I wasn't really practicing it or taking it seriously. And around the age of 30, I met some devotees that serve in the ISKCON festival program in the UK. And I was very inspired by the program of doing festivals around the country. I was very encouraged by this kind of missionary spirit of going into towns and villages and sharing Krishna consciousness with others. So I joined, and I almost gave everything up. Or I gave almost everything up. I didn't give everything up. I decided at that point that I didn't want to be a brahmachari and live in the temple. So I wanted to still earn some money. So I kept some work going. But ultimately, I gave my life and almost 10 years to the ISKCON festival initiative in the UK. And some people might have seen this on the podcast. I keep a photo here of Cherubinath, who was, he's passed away now, who was a disciple of Prabhupada, who set up the original festival program in the UK in the 1970s. And I've always been inspired by his very zealous attitude of just going out there and just doing it, and so I keep that picture there on the back of the book as a kind of an inspiration. So I gave my life to that project for almost 10 years, and I had some wonderful experiences, and I met lots of wonderful people, and it was through that initiative that I met the guru that I would I often struggle with the word guru, because it's kind of like I met the teacher. Why? Because it's a term that certainly in Western culture we don't often use. If I go to the local shop in my village and say I have a guru, they might think I'm kind of a bit weird or a bit odd, and so I guess I prefer the term kind of teacher or guide, but guru is okay. I feel even more uncomfortable with spiritual master. That sounds a bit kind of like, my goodness, someone's master.
Yes, you have no free will.
No. But in the end, I did take initiation in ISKCON. I was initiated by Hridayananda Goswami in 2017. After I would say a 2-year dialogue, we had some dialogue for 2 years. I was kind of following someone else in ISKCON before, but it just didn't work out because, you know, we weren't compatible. And I think
That's completely fine.
yeah, and I think I was looking for somebody who understood me as a normal person, and someone that I could relate to and related to me. And I was and still am impressed by Hridayananda Maharaj's approach to sharing Krishna consciousness with Western people in a way that's applicable to them. I keep talking about the village that I come from, but I guess I'm using that as an example. The people in the village that I come from will never wear weird clothes or dirty.
Exactly.
They'll never, want to start celebrating festivals that they don't understand necessarily. They might not use the term guru to describe a teacher. So, and I think I was impressed with Hridayananda Maharaj's maverick position on certain issues, particularly dress code. I actually quite like the fact he doesn't wear saffron. He's made that decision, and he has a growing following because of it. And I'm going to use the word liberal now, which is a very difficult word to use sometimes in Krishna consciousness, because you've got a left and right axes, and you've got conservative here and liberal here, and you've got in the middle. And those words mean different things to different people. But you could say that Hridayananda Maharaj is quite liberal on some issues. And that doesn't mean, for me, my understanding of that doesn't mean morally liberal. It's just socially liberal, and they're a little bit different.
Exactly. Just to make this point clear, sorry for interrupting, but for our audience, so they do not immediately jump to conclusions, liberal in terms of clothes, so that Western people from the West who are interested in spirituality genuinely could approach it and see it as something of universal value, and not something that is specifically tied to Indian community just for the Hindus, So I thought that was just a necessary clarification.
Thank you.
For our audience, not for you. Okay, so please go on.
Yeah, so Hridayananda Maharaj came to the UK in 2017, and we'd had some dialogue before then. And so I was initiated or received initiation and was given the name Narada Das. My other name is Nathan. And it's very, for me, my experience anyway, I don't know about others, when you get initiated, you then think for a few days about your name. Your new name, you start to worry, am I going to remember it? Am I going to respond to it? And I think I decided after a few weeks that I wasn't going to expect like my family to call me anything different. They could still call me Nathan. And, I remember going into the bank one day, and for some reason the bank person asked for my name, and I kind of froze for a second, wondering what to say. So it's Nathan. It's Nathan. I mean, do I literally change my name on everything? My passport, my bank statements? And after a while, I realized I wasn't going to do that. And, I think it depends who I meet and the context in terms of what name that I give them. But what I really love about the name Narada Das is that before I was initiated, I was thinking of all the ends that it might, that Hridayananda Maharaj could probably use to give, because often sometimes it's the first letter is used to give you your devotional name.
Yes.
I was thinking of Narayan. I was thinking of Nishingadev. I was actually thinking of Jagannath, Nathan, Nath there, and also Srinath Ji, as in Nathan. But for some reason, I didn't think of Narada at all. But Narada seems the most suitable name for me.
Yes, it does. I just wanted to say that I believe it, in the short time that I've known you, I believe it completely suits your personality, a person of knowledge, and the person who wants to spread that knowledge to the others freely and out of the goodness of his heart, and somebody who would like to, embrace the entire world or the entire universe as their family, because we know that Narada Muni always travels not just from country to country, but also intergalactically, from planet to planet, always bringing Krishna consciousnness or spiritual knowledge to all corners of the universe, to all beings who are seeking it. So that's how I see you, albeit on a smaller scale. So it once again confirms that one's spiritual teacher, as you prefer that term, is always divinely inspired. So he gave you the perfect name.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's and some people, just to clarify, it's Narada Das, not Narada Muni Das, and some people call me Narada Muni, and I like to tell jokes, and I'll say something like, "Oh, it's not Narada Muni. I left the Moonies years ago." The Moonies is a cult. Some people don't know who the Moonies were. They were a cult run by Reverend Sungmaya Moon. So some people laugh at that. Oh, I left the Moonies years ago, but yeah.
You have to explain it to the rest of us who are not aware of it, because it's a cultural reference.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
Your audience is a global audience, so we don't know all these cultural references.
The Moonies are still a cult. Well, a sect. Maybe I shouldn't use the word cult. They're a diverse Christian group with some interesting theological views. Sorry.
It's good you left it.
Yeah, I left them years ago.
Okay, and what happened next?
What happened next? It's really weird being interviewed, because like you're kind of trying to tease everything out of me, aren't you? So what happened next? What happened next was
yes.
I continued to serve with the ISKCON Festival program until 2021. So I was with them. I was actually with them for almost 10 years, but pretty much full time for 6 or 7 years. And then the pandemic happened. The COVID pandemic happened. And for me, it was fantastic. I got to stay at home, and I got to read, and I got to really think about my priorities and my values and things that were important to me. And, a number of things were happening in my own life then that really caused me or challenged me to think about my services or my seva, the projects, particularly in ISKCON that I was involved with. So two things were happening at the same time. One is because during the pandemic, you start to read things on the internet because you've got more time. So I then start to learn about all these things in ISKCON and ISKCON's past, about child abuse, about the abuse of people in general, because I've been so busy with my services before that I hadn't had time to look at the history of ISKCON from a social perspective. I mean, obviously, it's kind of a given that in lots of religious organizations, there's always things going wrong, but I never thought that ISKCON was an organization that had the same trials and tribulations as the Catholic Church. So those things started to come out, and I started to think about whether ISKCON was an organization that I wanted to be that involved with. And then also my relationship with the festival program was coming to an end. Even though I had got very involved with ISKCON, I'd always kept an interest in other religions and spirituality. And I remember one day, I wasn't initiated at this point. I was on a minibus going to a Harinam with some devotees from Bhaktivedanta Manor in the UK, and we were chatting, and this one brahmachari, he said, "Do you know what, Nathan? You can only go back to Godhead if you're in ISKCON." And I remember thinking, is that really true? And I'm like, I'm not sure if this is true, but I'm a bit freaked out by this, because what I forgot to mention, is that just before I went to Bhaktivedanta Manor a long time ago, I was involved for about 2 years with an evangelical church. So after the Methodists, who were quite cute and cuddly, I was dating this girl at the time, and as you do, and I went to meet her parents one day, and they were full on Bible-based, speaking in tongues, healing Christians. And they said, oh, do you want to come to this meeting with us? I said, all right then, you know, because I really like their daughter. So I went to this meeting, and it was at someone's house on a Friday night, and we had something to eat and everything. All of a sudden, people started to speak in these weird, like, tongue languages and started to fall on the floor. And I was like, what the hell is going on here? You know, I was really freaked out by the whole thing. But anyway, I was involved with this group for about a year or two, this evangelical group, and I left because it just didn't work. You know, I couldn't accept that there was one way to God. I just couldn't accept that. It's just not rationally accurate. And I made a vow to myself then, never to join any organization like it ever again. But then I joined ISKCON.
And then that brahmachari says, you know, the only way to
I literally felt
traumatized.
I literally felt traumatized by what he said. I thought, come on. I've joined
re-traumatized.
Yeah, re-traumatized. I've joined another tunnel visioned one way to God group. And I then realized that it was his view and not everyone had that view. But it's kind of set me on this journey for understanding, because he'd say stuff like, oh, don't join the Gaudiya Mats. Like, what's the Gaudiya Mat? I've never heard of these people. And then you get this picture in your head that the Gaudiya Mat's this rival organization, and they have different gurus, and they have different festivals and different beliefs. And then you kind of, you know, where are these people? You know, so, and anyway, my own relationship with the ISKCON festival program was coming to an end. I decided that I was going to write my own book. A lot of you know I've written a book.
Yes.
And that came out just after the pandemic, and that's on the diversity of the Hare Krishna movement in Britain. And it was wonderful. I spent 2 years researching for this book. I interviewed devotees from lots of different mats and sanghas. And for me, because my degree is in studying religions, it wasn't an issue. You know, for me, talking with someone down the road that I might not personally agree with wasn't an issue, because we're adults and we're mature. And I was writing this book whilst at the same time serving with the ISKCON festival program. And all of a sudden I get a phone call one day to basically say, you know, you're not meant to talk to the Gaudiya Mat. You know, and then not only had I been talking to the Gaudiya Mat, I spent 2 years interviewing them. And I was told all of my services were removed.
Because of that?
Yeah, because of this book.
Wow.
And
because you were interviewing Gaudiya Mat. So
yeah, and other groups.
All your services are taken away from you.
I was removed from all of my services.
That sounds like a specific form of spiritual blackmail.
And you know what was kind of, I don't know, it was upsetting or hurtful, is that this particular program, the ISKCON festival program, I'd given my life to them. You know, I'd made career sacrifices for them. I'd given them money. I mean, we've all given money to the Hare Krishnas, right? And you don't see where it is, where it's going. You know, I'd spent years booking halls for events, organizing Harinams, doing fundraising, you know, putting up with very difficult people, you know, as we all do. And then to be kind of pushed to the side like I was insignificant.
Yes.
You know, it was really hurtful.
Hurtful, very hurtful. That's, you know, I can understand your pain. Absolutely.
You know, and I've pretty much come to terms with that now. I think that I wasn't right for them. They wanted someone who could conform to them and their standards. And, you know, as I said just now, at the same time, all of this stuff's coming out about child abuse in ISKCON. And you spend a whole year then thinking, well, do I want to have any involvement with this organization?
Exactly, like many of us. Yeah, absolutely.
You know, and you kind of don't know who to trust, and you don't know what to believe. And then,
exactly.
and I guess that's a brief kind of analysis of what I was doing then. You know, yeah, I mean, I could start talking about something else, but it depends what your next question is.
And has this led you to the Hare Krishna Project?
Yes, most definitely.
And you started it in 2021?
Yeah.
Is that it? Okay. So, all right. Yes, please.
I mean, you know, when I was removed from my services in 2021, after a bit of a, you know, an emotional breakdown, I guess you could call it that, I then decided that I still wanted to serve Srila Prabhupada.
Yes.
That there's a lot of work to be done in the West, you know, and
Yes.
well, I'm going to get on and do it. Just
Mm.
because you say that I can't serve in your program, that doesn't
Mm.
mean that I'm any less of a human being. It doesn't mean that my emotions are not important. And
Exactly.
again, we were going through this kind of pandemic where you get a
Mm-hmm.
chance to read things online, you get the chance to meet people, and then you realize you're not the only person that's been removed from your services in ISKCON. You
Exactly.
know,
Exactly.
you then realize there's potentially hundreds of you that have
Mm.
been excluded,
Mm.
that have been, I don't want to use the word kicked out because I'm not banned from any temples. I'm not banned from ISKCON. I'm just removed from my services for writing this book. It's so bizarre. It's quite laughable now. And but
But
I
as I
really,
said, it's a sort of a spiritual blackmail, because if you were told, if you are contacting the Gaudiya Math, your services are removed. So it is exertion of influence of an institution over an individual, and it's really deeply disenchanting, disillusioning, and hurtful, because while we are all doing these services, we create these connections, we interact with other people and devotees, and as you said, you tolerate some difficult ones, you know. So of course it's going to be very hurtful when you hear something like that, and I'm glad you've come to terms with it.
yeah. And for me, I realized that I wanted to still serve and something needed to be done.
Mm-hmm.
So a group of us, so I guess I don't want to dwell on it too much, but a group
Mm-hmm.
of us had left the ISKCON festival program around the same time. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
quite a few devotees had left over the years. There was a lot of stuff going on. I think the thing that frustrated me were the double standards.
Mm-hmm.
Is that, you know, I was removed from my services for writing a book, whereas
Mm-hmm.
other devotees in the program, you know, if only I could tell you what they got up to in their private lives, you know.
Mm.
I mean, I'm not going to mention any names
I
because
understand.
I don't want to do that. But you know,
Mm-hmm.
living secret lives, money's going missing. I remember once I must have raised about £15,000 for them over a 3 or 4 year period,
Mm-hmm.
and I remember once finding out that a the money hadn't been spent on what it was meant to be.
Mm-hmm.
Two, um, no one had ever seen any accounts of this project. The money was being a group of us found out the money was being spent on hotel rooms and things, and so the people that ran the project could stay in, you know, hotel rooms. And I remember once I paid for some printing to be done. I think it was like £150 or something, on the absolute certainty that I would get my money back, or the ISKCON festival program would reimburse me. Oh, we haven't got
Mm-hmm.
that money. Yeah, but I've just found someone to pay. Oh no, no,
Mm-hmm.
we've spent the money on something else. And after a while, you just think, I cannot work with these people,
Mm-hmm.
you know. And so the Hare Krishna Project came about as a result of a lot of things, but one of our founding values is inclusion. We want to be as inclusive as possible. You know, we don't like excluding people because they're different from us. You know, I
Mm-hmm.
think of the sacrifices that Prabhupada made. You know,
Mm-hmm.
Prabhupada wouldn't exclude people for things that people in ISKCON are excluded for. I mean,
Yeah, he never excluded the minorities, you know, let's say in mundane terms, minorities. He never excluded anyone.
I remember one year, the leaders of the ISKCON festival program in the UK, they banned this woman. She is a devotee. They banned
Mm-hmm.
this woman from the minibus because she was overweight and because her kids were making a lot of noise. And
Mm.
you just, just anyway, I don't want
Unbelievable. It's just so shocking.
to. So I've put a lot of my time into the Hare Krishna project over the last 2 years, and it's been amazing to. You then all of a sudden get lots of devotees around the world contact you because they're feeling
Mm-hmm.
hurt, they've been
Yeah,
traumatized, you know. And
yeah.
I'm not a counselor in that
Mm-hmm.
sense. I'm not. I can't help. I can listen, and now I've got to the point where I just don't have time to listen. I get people messaging not every day, but several times a week, you know. And so the Hare Krishna Project has taken has filled a void that needed to be filled. And there are other devotees campaigning like me, and like Vedic Inquirer, Matters of
Yes,
Principle. You know, we're
yes.
just doing it in a different way.
Yes, absolutely. Well, I'm glad that you mentioned this mission of the Hare Krishna Project, which is inclusion, tolerance, and acceptance in the Hare Krishna movement, because I would like to ask you, do you think there is resistance, for example, to LGBTQ members in the Hare Krishna movement due to some horrific experiences in the history of ISKCON? You know, like, for example, Kirtanananda Swami, you know, pimping his female devotees to his henchmen to do his bidding, or because of the pedophilia scandals in Mayapur and Vrindavan.
Yes, it's a short answer. Absolutely, there's a resistance. And I think one of the challenges, one of the issues that ISKCON's had in the Western world is that it's ISKCON as an organization is socially conservative. So you kind of need to get married, and marriage is between a man and a woman. And your seva, predominantly, is either to live as a monk in the temple or to get married. To people like me, that sounds really boring. You know? And then we're living. I'm living in a socially liberal country.
Yes.
Most of us have had socially liberal upbringings. So again, what I mean by that is not necessarily morally liberal, but sometimes it does. I mean socially liberal. So I grew up in a culture which says that actually it's okay to be gay, it's okay to be homosexual. It's in the UK anyway, and I think most of Europe, it's now legal. Same-sex marriage is legal. I get confused about the United States. They keep changing their mind what they think on certain issues. But ultimately, the problem is individuals within ISKCON are inclusive of LGBTQI people, but the organization isn't as an institution. Now, that doesn't mean that it has to go and bring in a policy on same-sex marriage to do that. I'm not saying that, but it needs to go much further down the road to be much more inclusive of LGBT people, because LGBT people are one of the most excluded groups from ISKCON. They feel that they don't fit in. You know, one of the interviews I did recently was with Jennifer, who's a transgender woman from the north of England. And she really wanted to join ISKCON. She found a guru that she felt for her was the right one. But because she was born male, because she lives with her wife, the guru didn't want to know, didn't want to have anything to do with her. And just had this fascination with asking about, what was your name when you were born? And which bed do you sleep in at home? These are the questions this ISKCON guru was asking her. So we need to get a lot better at including LGBT people. And I think that ISKCON could, I don't think it exists yet. ISKCON doesn't have a general policy on homosexuality. And I think even having a policy which is maybe a bit broad, but encompassing would help. So I think that answers your question. I've probably rambled a bit, but you know.
Well, actually, you know, for example, gay people, they were very present in ISKCON, you know, as you know, devotees made friends with the Beatles and then with the other musicians in the UK, like Boy George being one of the most renowned ones. And that's how other friends of his also got in contact with the movement and joined the movement, and many of them were also gay. So I don't see this as a problem in the very beginning. I see that what happened afterwards with certain individuals, and I'm certainly in no way implying that, you know, all gay people are, you know, problematic and that they have criminal tendencies, but certain gay individuals in ISKCON created big problems or scandals, and how this was dealt with, in my opinion, is the problem. That there was no justice to these serious crimes that were even committed by straight people. So that leads me to my next question. Can there be acceptance and tolerance without justice? And what about the lack of justice in ISKCON?
Wow, what a question. Can there be acceptance and tolerance without justice?
Yes, because maybe I'm wrong, but I think that in the original way, in the days of Srila Prabhupada, LGBTQ people were accepted, but then certain individuals did certain crimes and there was no justice for those crimes. And then now new generations might think, well, are we going to have a repeat of the same thing? Because this could be a speculation, but this, this might be something that people are thinking. So, and we see that there is no good track record in ISKCON of, judicial sanction for crimes. So it doesn't matter if you're straight or gay. If there is no justice, if there is impunity in the society, will society survive? And will the society members be able to trust each other?
Wow, what a question. I would like to see them as two separate things. On the first hand, will LGBTQI people ever feel included? I would say I don't see that happening within the next 5 to 10 years. Or feeling ISKCON as an organization needs to go much further in showing tolerance. I'd even like the word tolerance, actually, acceptance and inclusion of LGBT people. In the moment in the UK, politically, we're going back. There's a lot of nonsense in the media at the moment about discrimination against trans people. I don't have got a clue where it's coming from, and there's now a trans Hare Krishna group on Facebook, which I've been invited to take part in, not because I'm trans, but because I'm an ally of the trans community. I want everybody, whether they're trans or not, to just be included or to feel included. And they have felt the need to set up this group because they don't feel included. I'm not going to go into too many details, but a devotee from one temple in the UK contacted me earlier this year. I think she just wanted somebody to talk to. She was a trans woman, and she was going to one of the ISKCON temples in the UK. She identified as a woman. She saw herself as a woman, and really, really, really wanted to stand on the side of the temple with the other women. And she was told that she couldn't because she wasn't born a woman. And as a result, she just feels like she doesn't fit in. She can't stand anywhere, and she doesn't go to the temple anymore. And that was a really kind of upsetting story. In terms of the bit about justice, ISKCON, this is a statement I think that applies to the whole of ISKCON, not just issues of justice. ISKCON needs to be a lot better at communicating with itself, at the departments within ISKCON, at communicating with itself and talking to itself. It needs to do a lot better and be a lot better. And people need to feel like if something's gone wrong, they can report it through the professional means, in the professional way, and it will be resolved. Now, the problem at the moment is that, I can't really understand why ISKCON is so different from any other organization, but there's so many things happening in terms of abuse, in terms of, this is a strong word now, but corruption. People are reporting those things and they're not seeing any actions or any response. So a couple of years ago in the UK, I served as part of the National Council. I was a kind of a substitute member for about 3 or 4 years. So I went instead of someone else. And it was fascinating to see how that group worked. Now, it was basically a bunch of white old men, right? So the female representation was almost non-existent. The representation from other groups, now you could say we're not the body, so it doesn't matter. I get that. But the representation from the Indian community was also pretty much non-existent. And so you would see how it was a rubber stamping exercise. Not everything, but most things, they just agree with the GBC, they vote it through, and they go to the next one. And I'd seen all of this in the kind of political world in my 20s, where it's, oh, we're just going to agree with so-and-so and we'll vote it through and we'll go on to the next. And you saw how certain sensitive issues were being talked about as not as a joke, but just not seriously. You know, it just wasn't being taken seriously. And we have these groups now, such as ISKCON Resolve is one. And there's one particular temple in the UK which has a long-running Resolve case being dealt with. And it's still going on because it's not being resolved. And as a result, most of the congregation have now walked out. They want the temple president to be removed. Most of the management have resigned, but he's standing firm. He's not going anywhere. And ultimately, he's keeping his house. He's keeping his position. I don't know whether he has a salary or not. In the UK, some temple presidents do. But he's comfortable materially because he's got these things. Whereas the congregation's been destroyed. And now, as a result, one of these congregation members, you know, she's not going to take it lying down. She's not putting up with it. She's, as you know, I told you privately, she's going to court, you know, and it looks like ISKCON's going to be sued for a lot of money next year because they didn't listen. They didn't, you know, people come with complaints and issues. Oh, just they tell you where to go. They don't try and deal with it then. And ISKCON Resolve are not resolving it. It's gone back to the National Council. And so people just get fed up with a system that never ever works. In the UK, most of the temple presidents now have been temple presidents for 20 years. Imagine if, I don't know, in most countries, you have a prime minister or a president. After 8, 9, 10 years, you start to get a bit kind of jaded and you want change, or your local councillor or your local MP. You know, in the Church of England, most Christian churches, they don't last for 20 years because people feel a bit stagnant. Most of the temple presidents in the UK have been there for 20 years and there's no sign of them leaving. There's also no sign of growth, those temples.
So ISKCON is not fulfilling its mission because the mission, one of the objectives of the ISKCON mission is to keep expanding, keep giving Krishna consciousness to new people, and also nurturing, helping old members, previous members of ISKCON to nurture and expand their spiritual life. And how can this be done when problems are not resolved, when there is no justice? And that's, I've been also saying to my devotee friends, when we are discussing these topics, you know, that the only way to make serious change is actually to report these serious crimes to the police and to take matters to the court wherever there is a need, because nothing will make certain individuals change their mind. And this hurtful treatment of devotees has been going on for years and too deep, in my opinion. And as I've also learned from the global community of devotees, you know, horrendous things happened, and I was just completely appalled that police was not contacted ever, and was not reported to the police, and that it was never processed in the court when, you know, and it's really not just horrendous. It's just completely opposite of the philosophy of the of ISKCON or the Hare Krishna movement, and which is, you know, that there is protection in civil society. There is, in every civilized society, there is protection of women, children, cows, brahmanas, and the elderly. And we keep reading this in the Srila Prabhupada's books, but we do not see it in many countries, in many places, in practice. So there is like a complete contradiction of theory and practice, and people do not want to see that. People want to live that, you know, as we are told in theory to chant Hare Krishna, and we do it in practice. We also want to see other points of the teachings, you know, established in practice. And that's why I say, you know, just report it to the mundane authorities, because the internal system is non-existent, as it seems. And that's why I wanted to ask you, Do you think it's possible to have justice and encourage devotees to seek justice if they are intimidated by Vaishnava Parada? Because you know that Vaishnava Parada is very prominent in our philosophy. And if devotees are constantly told not to criticize and to tolerate, and this philosophy of Vaishnava Parada to be misplaced in cases when devotees shouldn't tolerate, is it ever possible for them to seek justice?
I love your questions, by the way. And just so the viewers know at home, I didn't know any of these questions in advance. That is a really big question. And I think there's a verse, isn't there, in Sastra about we should be more humble than a blade of grass.
Exactly.
And unfortunately, that verse is used to mean that people can walk all over you, that people can abuse you. Oh, you should tolerate it, Prabhu. You should put up with
Yes.
it.
Yes.
Yeah, but I've just been punched in the face. Yes,
Exactly.
but my bank account's just been, I know one devotee who
Yes.
moved into a temple and they said, well, we kind of need to have access to your finances.
Oh
The
my God.
next thing he knows is his bank account's empty. Oh, if you ever leave the temple, you can have the money back. So he did leave 6 or 7 years later. Oh, we spent the money on something else now.
Surprise, surprise.
I shouldn't laugh really. I laugh in just I hear these things all the time.
But it's terrible. It's so shocking. It's like on so many levels. Not that he's financially damaged, but this also destroys or mars the faith of an individual. Isn't that also horrendous? Because you can, get your money back. You can earn it again in that sense. But what about faith? Isn't it most precious what we are told from the very beginning, to give Krishna consciousness to people, so connect them with Krishna, with God, and then, some people go and do something that completely destroys the faith of that devotee, because that is the basis on which individuals' Krishna consciousness is founded on. Faith.
Yeah. I mean, for me, it has to be a balance. Everything's based on balance and interpretation. So absolutely this verse about being more humble than a blade of grass, but that doesn't mean that people can walk all over you. I was very overweight as a child, right? And up until I was about 17, 18. And I was taught by my mother and my grandmother, don't let the bullies get to you and don't let them walk all over you. Nathan, you've got to stand up for yourself.
Exactly.
And I still try and apply that to my life as a Hare Krishna devotee. We have to try and surrender and be humble, but that doesn't mean that people can walk all over you.
Exactly.
We should be campaigners for justice. This is Prabhupada's movement, Lord Chaitanya's movement. And it doesn't mean we should put up with stuff that are clearly wrong. It doesn't mean we should put up with theft, abuse of anybody, of bullying. And we have a situation in ISKCON now where the management they've taken on the roles of judge, jury, and executioner. They're all of these things. And I feel really sad so I'm in the Vedic Inquirer group, I'm in the Matters of Principle group, and I read what people say. And I can feel the passion of devotees who want to reform ISKCON. They love Prabhupada's movement and they want to reform it. They want to get it back on track. But I feel really sad for them because I'm a little bit more skeptical and I don't believe it's going to happen. Or if it does happen, we're talking several decades. Because if I'm a bit of a historian or a sociologist, if you look at the history of religion or the development of religious groups, things change really slow. And often in the study of religion, it's called a schism. So a schism is when a religious group splits.
Yes.
And because we're still on this generation of gurus after Prabhupada, we won't really see the change that the devotees want until a lot of them have passed away or left their bodies, kind of Hare Krishna terminology. And most of those men are in their 70s. And it could be at least another decade before we start to see those changes that people really, really want. And I think the thing that people in the Matters of Principle group need to ask themselves, or the Vedic Inquirer group need to ask themselves, is do they want to sit around and wait for a decade? Or do they want to kind of not? You know, there are a lot of us now that are running our own projects independent from the management of ISKCON.
Exactly.
And it's going really, really well. I mean, in the UK, I wouldn't say there's not hundreds, there's tens of us that are running our own projects, inspired by Srila Prabhupada, and we're getting on with book distribution. And also, just to clarify to people, that's not in a Ritvik way either. I am not a Ritvik. I have friends that are Ritviks, but that's not in a Ritvik way. We're passionate about Prabhupada and sharing his books, his teachings. And so a lot of us have just become fed up with the management of ISKCON because we've either experienced negative things ourselves, and we just know justice won't be served under the current management. I mean, if I don't want to go into it today, but I could write another book about the management of ISKCON in the UK and the financial irregularities and missing money, you know, and things happening behind closed doors. I sat through those meetings for 4 years, you know, and I made notes. You know, and just the things, the way people are spoken about, like they're just pieces of muck on a shoe. So I don't think my advice is very helpful necessarily for devotees, that they need to kind of get on with their own sadness. I was, you know, the first ever devotee I interviewed for my book was a devotee called Madhu, and he was the first disciple of Narayan Maharaj in the UK. He grew up in ISKCON, but he left in the 90s, and he was the first person I interviewed, and we were talking about child abuse particularly. We talked about a lot of stuff, but child abuse. And he says, you know, I just don't understand ISKCON. Why don't you just phone the police and get on with your bhajan?
Thank you. That's what I've been saying for ages.
Yeah.
Exactly.
We've become like the Jehovah's Witnesses or the Mormons. So they deal with it behind closed doors. We'll have our own internal investigation. It'll take 10 years, and then but the child abusers are still allowed to worship this. And so ISKCON is exactly the same as that. Just call the police and get on with your life.
Exactly. It's unbelievable. But, you know, I think it's also due to our philosophy. Philosophy is used to silence any intelligent question or thought, you know, like you do not, if you accept some figure of authority, whether it's a director of a gurukul or a teacher in a gurukul, they are your authority, and you should obey them and just be humble. And if you do ask these intelligent questions, then you are immediately labeled as somebody who is not humble, as somebody who is audacious. So there's a lot of guilt tripping, and it's extremely difficult, especially for young people, like children in schools, to deal with that. It's easier for us when we are older, like you and me now. But for young children, you know, what is the chance, you know, to survive in such an environment if somebody makes a grave mistake, if somebody starts abusing them? So it's I'm just personally appalled how our philosophy has been twisted and manipulated, like in Machiavellian ways, to guilt trip victims and to beat people mentally into submission. So I believe it's very necessary for everyone just to read Srila Prabhupada's books and to learn, first of all, what's Vaishnava Parad. Vaishnava Parada, one of the Vaishnava's paradas is also to hit a Vaishnava, physically beat them. So that's immediately Vaishnava Parada, and there is a clear definition in Shastra what happens to that person if they beat a Vaishnava. They lose all their wealth and health and good fortune in life and things like that. And also how the philosophy of forgiveness is being manipulated. There is a very interesting section in Mahabharata in Vana Parva, the discussion between Prahlad Maharaj and Bali Maharaj. Should I forgive him? When somebody should be forgiven and when not. And Bali Maharaj says, you know, that neither is good to always forgive and to always punish somebody. And he gives specific examples when forgiveness should be given and when it should not. And it's very clear, very precise, like one of the cases when somebody should not be forgiven is a second offender, no matter how small his misdemeanor. So this is Vana Parva in Mahabharata. If anyone is interested, after hearing this, they can look it up there, and other examples. So I believe it's very necessary that people like you, Narada, also spread this knowledge, because the knowledge of Krishna consciousness is not just what we hear from these people in positions of power and authority. It's much more, but they are just being selective what they are choosing from Shastra to justify their behavior and to silence intelligent audience. So I wish you all the best in your future endeavors, because
I mean,
we said Narada spreads knowledge.
the thing is, not all, but most religious organizations are guilty of that. They use scripture or sastra to suit
Yes.
their own needs. So Christians are a great example of that. The Bible is used in so many ways to justify lots of different things. So, for example, you can have the Catholic Church over here, and you can have the Quakers over here. They're both very different Christian groups. I mean, the Quakers are Christian almost, but they both use the Bible to justify certain things. And I think we in the Gaudiya Vaishnava tradition are also guilty of that. We'll use Sastra and we'll use the words of Prabhupada actually to justify things.
Exactly, absolutely. And you really need to be well read to make a good decision on any issue. Like, I just wanted to say something about transgenderism. Like, first of all, in our Shastra, in Mahabharata, there is the case of ancient, could I say it like that, transgenderism case, in the case of Shikandi, if you heard of it. You know that story of Bhishma abducting 3 princesses, because that was the ways of the Kshatriya. It was allowed, and it was considered chivalrous to take the princesses and, just bring them as brides to his brother. And then these 3 princesses were Amba, Ambika, and Ambalika. And one of them, I believe, I wrote it. Amba wanted to marry a different prince, Salva, and she told Bhishma, I've given my heart to him before you abducted me. I wanted to marry him, and he also wanted to marry me, so let me go. And Bhishma let her go, and she went to Salva, but because in that day and age, it was unheard of that she would be in the custody of one man and then go back to the other. And Salva rejected her and said, no, Bhishma won you fair and square, and you should be, in his household and join his family. I cannot marry you. So she came back and demanded of Bhishma to marry her to his brother, and or to marry her himself. But he declined because Bhishma had taken a vow of lifelong celibacy. And then she was so angry, and she went to the woods, and she was so angry that she did great penance. And then Lord Shiva came, and he asked her, okay, what boon do you want of me from me because of these great penances that you've been performing? And she said, I want to be the cause of Bhishma's death. And he said, okay, tatastu, let it be so. And he said, in next lifetime, you will be born as a man, and you will be the cause of Bhishma's death. And then she went into the fire and burnt her body, and she got incarnated again as Shinkandini, a princess. And then she was raised as female. But as she was growing up, she remembered that hate of Bhishma and everything from the past life. And then she decided to change her gender and become Shikandi. And that's how she entered the fight in the Battle of Kurukshetra. And Bhishma knew that. And he said, I wouldn't fight her because she's actually female and she's Amba from her previous life. And that's how Shikandi was able to attack Bhishma. So that's the first case of, first of all, of transgenderism in our philosophy. And now fast forward to contemporary days where Srila Prabhupada, there are instances, if you just look it up on the internet, where Srila Prabhupada had a disciple who was thinking of changing his gender. And he was just telling that disciple, because he was thinking, should I be a girl or should I be a boy? 1 week this, the next week that. He said, pick a gender and stick to it. He was just not in favor of, that disciple making it a fashionable trend that he's going to change every day, every week. So he didn't mind that the disciple wanted to change the gender. He accepted him or her. So when we are talking about these topics, we really need to educate ourselves as ISKCON members about the actions and behavior of our acharya, because isn't that what we are taught from day one, that we follow the instructions of the previous acharyas? And this is what the founder acharya of ISKCON did in practice. He accepted everyone. He was inclusive, as you would say. He just wanted everyone, whether transgender or straight or gay, to be at a certain level of decent behavior. And that's why we have 4 regulative principles. He expected all of his disciples and grand disciples to follow that. So I believe what you're doing is really fantastic. Just people need to be educated on these lesser known points from our philosophy and practice.
And I love listening to the story that you told then. And since I've probably I've taken this position over the last 2 years about standing up for the minority groups in the Hare Krishna movement, you get a lot of criticism as well. I've received some quite unpleasant messages, and you learn to be thick-skinned. You develop a tough whatever, and you just got to get on with your day. I mean, it's quite sad that we have to abuse each other or be mean to each other. But yeah, and for me, Prabhupada was ultra inclusive, super inclusive. Prabhupada wouldn't have excluded anybody. And we as representatives of Prabhupada shouldn't exclude anyone as well, unless they seriously have done something terribly wrong.
Yeah.
And yes, there has to be some level of exclusion,
Yeah, then just call the police.
It has to be a balance, but we need to be just better at including people. And that's, I get people now from around the world. They look at the Hare Krishna Project website, and we have a section on values. And it's probably one of the only Hare Krishna websites in the world where you'll find a section on values in terms of what's important to us. Tolerance, inclusion, acceptance, treating people with respect. And people get in touch to say, I just thank you for what you're doing, and you're just standing up for us. You're speaking out on certain issues, and a number of the guests that have been on this podcast over the last 3 years, they became a guest because I asked them. But before that, they found the Hare Krishna Project because I was the only one speaking on certain issues, and they just really appreciated that kind of stance. But going back to the point you made earlier about people, the whole issue of Vaishnav aparad and feeling that you can't criticize your guru or you can't criticize the institution. I completely accept that it's very difficult to mentally move away from that position. If you've grown up in the movement, or if you join the movement at a young age and the movement is everything to you, and I get that it's very difficult. And for me, though, my background's different. My family are not devotees. My employment, how I earn money, is nothing to do with the Krishna consciousness movement. Well, I mean, not really. So if
same here.
Yeah. So in one sense, I couldn't care less what people in the Hare Krishna movement think about me. It doesn't mean I can say everything I want about certain things, but my life, I have a life outside of the Hare Krishna movement. I'm going to spend Christmas with my mother and stepfather, and I will spend Christmas with my mother and stepfather, irrespective of what the management of ISKCON think about me. And we'll watch some great comedy, we'll have a lovely time because it's Christmas. So, but I accept for some people, the movement is everything to them. So their parents are in the movement, their siblings are in the movement, their children are in the movement. Some people are employed by the movement. So they can't speak out so easily. They can't say what they think, I was yesterday just looking through the charity return for ISKCON UK. ISKCON UK has got, for some bizarre reason, 160 paid staff. I have no idea who they are or what they do. But there's a lot of people who are financially reliant on the ISKCON in the UK. And so They just can't speak out on certain issues, or they can't have an opinion on certain issues. You know,
Mm.
I know a number of devotees in London who are ISKCON devotees in one sense, but they
Mhm.
also go to the Narada Maharaj temple, but it's a secret.
Mhm,
Okay.
mhm.
I know one devotee, absolutely not going to say his name, who was initiated in the Narada Maharaj mat, but nobody's allowed to know. You still
Mm.
have to call him by his birth name because
Mhm.
nobody will be his friend again. It's really sad.
Yes, it is, because at the same time we hear that we respect all Vaishnavas in other groups, at least that's what I've been taught. So if we do respect other Vaishnavas in other masts and group, then what is the problem, seeing some of them from time to time in a friendly manner? Does it mean immediately that you are committing such a serious mistake, just by socializing with such people?
I mean, and certainly we've talked just now about how scripture can be used to justify certain things.
Mm.
And Prabhupada said lots of things, like Jesus said lots of things. And so
Mhm.
Prabhupada did make some statements that if they're interpreted on their own, could imply that you shouldn't have anything to do with his godbrothers.
Mm.
Prabhupada did say, absolutely, I can think of one particular reference, not to have anything to do with his godbrothers. But what was the context? Why was he saying that at
Exactly.
that time?
Thank you. I just wanted to ask you that. Please explain us the context.
Yeah.
And you are a journalist, what it means to take something out of
Yeah,
context.
yeah. So if you read that line, it's oh my goodness, you can't have anything to do with his godbrothers. But the context was Prabhupada at the time was very disappointed. He was upset. He was very angry. His godbrothers weren't helping him.
Exactly. Exactly.
Now, I've never done this because I literally don't have the time. But if you
Mhm.
put all of Prabhupada's statements about his godbrothers from 1966 to 1977, and that could be a
Mhm.
task, and put them in chronological order,
Mhm.
there were many things Prabhupada said after that statement that were favorable to his godbrothers. He
Mhm.
glorified his senior godbrother, Sridhar Maharaj. You know, he
Mhm.
asked Sridhar Maharaj to be the president of ISKCON. You
Mhm.
know, I didn't make, I said that once to a devotee and they thought I was making that up. I'm not making it up. You can find it on the internet. You know,
Yes.
Prabhupada wanted Sridhar Maharaj to go and live in the ISKCON temple and you could have your own quarters and your own room.
Mhm.
Before Prabhupada left the planet, Prabhupada, the devotees asked Prabhupada, after you're gone, who should we go to for advice? Prabhupada said, for advice about my samadhi, go to Narayan Maharaj. For philosophical advice, go to Sridhar Maharaj.
Yes.
Right. So we have to understand the context of what Prabhupada was saying. Now,
Mhm.
I would say some of the statements that Prabhupada made are kind of absolute truth or sacrosanct, so things that can't be changed, like the four regulator principles,
Yes.
chanting 16 rounds a day. But other things, if you look at the Prabhupada statements on dress code,
Mhm.
sometimes he did say, yes, wear a dhoti, wear a kurta. Other times he said, dress is a dead thing. Why are you worried about these clothes? You know,
Exactly.
dress like a gentleman, nice suit or something, you know? So you have to, who is he saying these statements to based on the time?
And in which situations, in which circumstances?
Yes. Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah.
And there's a fancy name for that. So just for the sake of our audience who are not aware of it, let's just mention it. In scientific term, it's called hermeneutics. It's understanding certain things that might seem contradictory, but aren't, because they are closely tied to time, place, and circumstance. And that's why you will find such seemingly contradictory statements, which are not contradictory, because Srila Prabhupada was sometimes speaking with Indian gentlemen in India, gentlemen, and sometimes he was speaking with Westerners in
Yeah.
US of A. That's it. And I just would like to go back to the point of Vaishnava Parada, so people do not think that we are just, mindless criticizers who want to criticize ad nauseum. There is also a philosophical point and philosophical explanation by His Divine Grace Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur when criticism is actually allowed. And that is when there is a proper motive. And what is the proper motive? Naturally, you will ask. And Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur explained that the proper motive for criticism is when it benefits that person that we are criticizing. For example, if I say, hey, Narada, why are you, eating meat? You shouldn't be eating meat. So I'm criticizing you, and I'm just speaking hypothetically. People, Narada is not eating meat. So, or when we are criticizing somebody for our personal benefit, like, why are you doing this to me? Why are you, guilt tripping me? You're making me feel bad. So you are standing up for yourself. And the third proper motive for criticism is that it benefits the larger society. So like we are doing now, we are criticizing together certain things online because we know that the big audience is listening, and we are talking about these things that need to be rectified in ISKCON, in that society, for the benefit of all devotees. So knowing that, it might be easier for somebody to speak up, to decide to speak up if they were reluctant to do so in the past. So just to be clear on that, that is very, very important, because in all of this, we are actually learning ourselves, to discuss sensitive topics, important topics, and also help others who are maybe not so much skilled in these things as we are, because both of us, we are journalists by profession, and it's our job to analyze and to critique and to question. Somebody who didn't have that education doesn't have that experience. So with this experience, we are also trying to serve the devotees and point these things out.
Yeah. Yeah. And, I was just thinking of something when you were talking there about how, Vaishnava Aparad, yes, doesn't mean you can walk all over people. It's important to challenge, but also we need to respect people. We need to we have to we recognize that Krishna exists in the hearts of all. We should always try and be respectful if possible. So that's that balance, isn't it? Like, people want reform within ISKCON and they want to challenge the leadership, but they also don't want to offend them. I don't particularly want to offend anybody either.
Exactly.
I don't like particularly, my grandmother always taught me as a kid. She'd say, Nathan, if you've got nothing nice to say, don't say anything at all. And that kind of mantra has kind of applied to me, and I try and put it into practice. Just don't say anything. I'm not one of these people who goes on these Facebook groups and constantly criticizes. Even though I agree with the criticism, I'm just not going to sit there on my keyboard typing, yes, so-and-so guru said this, so-and-so said that, yes, let's write to the GBC, get them to do this. I'd rather be proactive in my own way, which is kind of, hopefully making a difference.
Yes, we need to learn as a society how to respectfully disagree and respectfully question things, and just respectfully articulate our concerns and complaints. That's on one level. And of course, I know that there are a lot of devotees who had done that, but nothing happened. And then we need to learn also as a society, if that fails, then go to the police.
But I also say if it's an issue of something serious like child abuse, you go to the police as well at the same time.
Yes, absolutely. So we've been talking for an hour and 20 minutes, and I would have other things to ask you, but maybe should we stop here? Maybe it's going to be too long for our.
I mean, you can ask one more question. Let's. I see. I haven't got a clue what these questions are. It's great, actually. Usually, I put all the preparation into the podcast, but just got. I don't know. Throw another question. Or I don't know what the response will be.
Okay, so because this podcast is very important to you, and because you had previous experiences, I would like to ask you to compare this podcast and the previous experiences, and to ask you, how has this podcast enriched or impacted your life? What do you, as an individual, as a person, Narada, take from this experience, these 2-3 years that you've been doing this?
I never initially wanted to do a podcast. I always felt that I was too busy, or there were other podcasts. There are other great podcasts in the Hare Krishna movement, and I never wanted to do a podcast. And someone encouraged me to start one during the pandemic, and then it started. And initially, it was meant to be a podcast within ISKCON with ISKCON devotees. After episode number 11, I just got quite bored. And then I thought, right, we have to spice this up a bit. I want to start talking about other issues. And I know a lot of devotees, because of the research for this book I'd done before, that weren't part of ISKCON, but I wanted to interview them. I wanted to talk to them. And now we've got to episode 100. And for me, I now see this podcast as a saver. Now, this podcast, I wouldn't say it fills a gap in my life, because I can be busy with other stuff. You know, I'm planning to start a second book soon. But the podcast is filling a void, filling a gap within the Hare Krishna movement. And we're touching on issues that other podcasters are not touching on. You know, and again, that's not a criticism of them, but I never wanted to create another wishy-washy, feel-good podcast. Now, I can do that if people really want me to, but actually our most highly viewed or most viewed episodes are the ones where we talk about the most controversial issues. So unfortunately, they're about child abuse. They're about satanic ritual abuse in ISKCON. It does happen. We've just produced one on black magic. That's gone through the roof in terms of views. We produced one trans. I've interviewed 3 trans devotees. The first one was a wonderful devotee in America called Suki. I don't know if she's watching. And that had 1,000 views within one day, because she was brave enough to come online and talk about her experiences as a trans woman in the Hare Krishna movement. You know, and also we did one a couple of years ago with Chaitanya Leela, who's a psychologist in the UK, where we talked about domestic violence and mental health within the Hare Krishna movement. And those podcasts get the most views. And I didn't plan that. That's the way it is. Whereas, unfortunately, if somebody from, let me rephrase that. If somebody from Bhaktivedanta Manor wants to come and talk about cows at the manor, unfortunately, a lot of people aren't going to watch it. You know, it's as lovely as cows are.
Yes,
Just not going to tune in.
they're well taken care of. Now it's time for other groups.
And so this podcast has kind of filled that gap where people just weren't talking about these issues. And I have a number of other issues that we still haven't talked about, that and some individuals that I am still persuading to come onto the show. You know, for example, one issue is abortion. Now, I don't believe a podcast has ever been produced about abortion from a devotee perspective, or from a Hare Krishna perspective. But it's a very sensitive issue. And trying to find a devotee who would like to talk about it from her own experiences is not easy. You know, I have been in dialogue with one lady for at least a year. She's had an abortion. She's a practicing Hare Krishna devotee. And we almost got to the point where we were going to set a date for the podcast. We were going to do the recording, but she then felt that she just couldn't do it. It's such a personal issue. So there are a number of issues that we, you know, and I am in conversation with a number of those, or 2 of those gurus from the original 11 that are no longer gurus in ISKCON, and I'm having some dialogue with them about coming on and being in an interview, and you know, they would be quite big. So the podcast is going to carry on to, when I say challenge authority, I don't mean that in a negative way, but to challenge our way of thinking, and to really think about what issues need to be discussed within the Hare Krishna movement. And that's what the Hare Krishna Project podcast does. For me, there are no go areas. If somebody wants to talk about something, we can talk about it.
Well, that's really great. I think we need a dialogue like that. We need discussions on these issues, very important issues. And I like what you are doing, definitely. But unfortunately, we have to stop here. Otherwise, we could go on for 3 hours, and that's in this day and age too long for many people. So we would have to stop here. And who knows, maybe I will interview you for your episode number 200 because this is just 100. It's been a pleasure to interview you, and thank you again for this honor. And I've learned more about you and about your podcast and what you've been doing, and I hope that our viewers also got their answers, that they were interested in about many things about you. And we will see, we'll keep watching your podcast, and we're interested all to see what your next guest is going to be, or your next topic. But
Me too.
Thank you for doing this service. I think it's very important service, and I wish you all the best in your endeavors. I wish you good holidays. Celebrate with your mom and with your stepdad. So Merry Christmas, everyone, whoever is celebrating, because that is still our philosophy. Jesus Christ was the Son of the Lord. So we are always inclusive here. And on that note, I would like to say goodbye to everyone, and to give us your feedback. We are interested in your feedback, and please don't forget to like and subscribe to either the page on Facebook or the YouTube channel if you're watching on YouTube. So that's all for today. Thank you very much. Thank you, Narada. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Bye-bye.
Bye.